Next is Book 6. In Book 6, Aristotle enumerates the 5 types of stable state of the soul, hexes, which can be considered intellectual virtues. So, we have been told that virtue comes about by choosing a mean between vicious extremes according to the right principle. This is only as helpful as telling a sick person that health comes about by choosing medicine according to what a doctor might prescribe. That is, we have no helpful understanding of virtue until we learn what these right principles is. To learn about the right principle, we must examine the intellectual virtues. The soul is divided into a rational part and irrational part. The rational part can be further divided into a contemplative part, which studies the invariable truths of science and mathematics, and the calculative part, which deals with the practical matter of human life. Right reasoning with respect to the contemplative intellectual corresponding to truth. With the practical intellect, right reasoning corresponds to proper deliberation, and that leads to making the right choices. There are 5 intellectual virtues by which the soul arrives at truth. First is scientific knowledge. Arrives at eternal truths by means of deduction or inductions. So, next is art or technical skills involves productions according to the proper reasoning. Third is prudence or practical wisdom. Help us to pursue the good life generally. Fourth is institution help us from grasp first principles from which we derive scientific truths. And the last is wisdom is a combination of scientific knowledge and institution which help us arrive at the highest truths of all. And then political science is a species of reproduce since it involves ensuring the good life for an entire city. So, art is making things in a way which can be explained. Next is the knowledge. Next is practical judgment, wisdom, and common sense or intellect. Resourcefulness or good deliberation is not the same thing that is scientific knowledge, opinion, or conjecture. It is a process that helps achieve the ends envisaged by prudence. Understanding is a form of judgment regarding practical matters, which nakakatulong na ma-determine ang mga equitable. So, judgments is understanding, prudence, and institution are all natural gifts. So, ito yung mga natural na regalo na nakakatulong sa atin na makadetermine ng right course of action. The intellectual virtues help us to know what is just and admirable. And the moral virtues help us to do just and admirable deeds. We might wonder what value the intellectual virtues have then. Since knowledge is useless without action, that's true. First, the intellectual virtues lead to happiness, and so are ends in themselves. Second, the intellectual virtues help us to determine the best means to the ends, at which the moral virtues teach us to aim. Without prudence and cleverness, a well-disposed person can never be truly virtuous, because these intellectual virtues help us grasp the right principle of action. Within intellectual virtue, Aristotle distinguishes the contemplative from the calculative. Contemplative reasoning deals with the eternal truths. For Aristotle, these are the truths unrelated to the human action. As revealed in the natural science and mathematics, contemplative reasoning makes use of the intellectual virtues of scientific knowledge, institution, and wisdom. Scientific knowledge consists mostly of logical differences derived from the first principle. This first principle cannot themselves be inferred through scientific reasoning, but can be grasped only through institution. And wisdom is a combination of institution and scientific knowledge. It involving a deep understanding of natural world. So in this wisdom is deep understanding or pagkakaintindi mo sa natural na mundo. The Greek word for wisdom is Sophia. And our word philosopher literally means lover of wisdom. Wisdom is the highest of all intellectual virtues because it involves a profound understanding of the internal truths of the universe. Such understanding is brought about by philosophy. So, pinakamahalaga ang wisdom. Dahil ito ang nakakaintindi sa lahat. Though Aristotle thinks his work on ethics and politics is important, he rates his work on science, metaphysics, and logic is much more important. So, it means connected. However, the ethics is a concern with the practical and non-terminal matters of the human world. So, contemplative reasoning receives relatively brief mention. So, thus art are technical skill, which is important mostly to artists and artisans, and does not fall within the scope of the ethics. Art or technical skills guides us in the correct manner of producing things. Prudence or practical wisdom guides us in the correct manner of actions. This intellectual virtue, which is closely tied to the rational deliberation and choices necessary to the moral virtues, is the central focus of Aristotle's discussion of the intellectual virtues in ethics. The Greek word translated as prudence or practical wisdom is phronesis, which conveys a general sense of knowing the proper behavior in all situations. Phronesis is an intellectual virtue rather than a moral virtue because we learn through instructions and not practice. It means natuto tayo sa instructions, hindi sa totoong ginagawa. But it is very closely connected to the moral virtues. Without phronesis, it would be impossible to practice the moral virtues. So, mahalaga rin pala ang phronesis. Aristotle is telling us that having one's heart in the right place is not good enough. Is it true? Being a good person requires a kind of practical intelligence as well as a good disposition. Tama. Moral virtue supplies us with the appropriate major premises and phronesis. It helps us to move from the major premises to an appropriate course of action. Because without phronesis, the virtuous person would not necessarily know how to act. Because in phronesis, it is all about practices, the virtues. And without moral virtue, the clever person would not always pursue the appropriate ends. So, it's a tie and it's a pair that they don't live without each other.